Michelle.
Daniel. OG Rose.
Andrew.
Andrew Luber's here! Well, Andrew Luber is sitting on our porch, which is remarkable.
Amazing.
That is really remarkable.
So cool.
So thank you all the LA, Philadelphia. Mr. Luber is a traveling man, so that's impressive. We've had a lot of wonderful talks. The topics conversation, I'm like, oh, it's been 4 hours. Wow. So it's like, because I wrote so many notes like on the apathetic subject and what you would talk the meaning story and different things. So Andrew, it's great to have you here today. So.
Thank you. It's great to be here. It's
Well,
a beautiful farm, beautiful house, beautiful family.
Well, you're very kind, my friend. You're very kind. Well, we were just sitting out here talking about goodness, value, story, morals, and different things. And, you know, Mr. Luber, when I bring up those topics or different books you've read or thinkers, like what is goodness? You know, small topic. We don't have 2,000 years of philosophy looking to figure that one out. So, and goodness is the children. Here they are. So, you know, what are some different things that come to mind on that topic or your thinking in general?
Well, my thinking is definitely heavily influenced by my professor in college, David Wolfsdorf. Professor Wolfsdorf, he wrote a book called On Goodness, where he's trying to basically answer the age-old Platonic question of what is good,
Right.
what is goodness, and he takes a semantic approach of it's a heavy linguistic approach, and basically he just sees goodness as something achieving its purpose to a significant degree, and that has a lot of meat that's subsumed in that definition. Like, what is significance? Like, significance, you know, that in itself could be a whole class and a whole what is significance, a whole discussion. So I think he provides like a very good framework that's based very much on language itself and how the English language is constructed. So yeah, I was thinking about how like a good story. So applying good to particular things, like a good walk. Like what makes a good walk? You know, like it has to do with the goal of the walk. It has to do like what is significance within that context. So yeah, it's just really interesting stuff for sure.
Well, I appreciate it. First off, I think a lot of philosophy professors or philosophers in general don't ask those questions anymore. You kind of say, what do you mean they don't ask those questions? It's like they just kind of do thought experiments, or they almost do more negative things where they say, I can always come up with a exception to show that your moral premise, like murder is always wrong, is wrong. You know, you can always come up with something to show that maybe there are situations where murder is acceptable because it's just killing. Yeah. That's all good and well, but how can we tell the difference between murder and killing? You know, that's a different question, right? I can always unveil in my moral thought experiment that killing, something that you think is killing, is actually murder. Say I prove to you that sentience is the basis of ethics and therefore animals are sentient, therefore that would be murder. But then it's like, well, okay, then how do you tell the difference, and how do you say for sure, like sentience then should be the basis of a moral theory? And it's more like what you see philosophers do is say, well, it might be, but the problem is if all you ever have is a kind of might be without making kind of the case to sort of show the elements you would even need to do to make that processing to really conclude that, then you've just left people with nothing. They don't even know where to begin.
Right.
So what you're describing, I really appreciate in that it is putting forth like a framework by which to even go about thinking about goodness. And then I'll just add too, which is that we were talking a minute ago about this kind of interesting thing. Like I really like the definition you said, but isn't it funny how then you almost have to go through a life to know what that definition meant?
Right.
And you were saying like story and value and meaning, and it is interesting to me, like you hear something, so oh, that's true. But then like 10 years later you go, oh, that's true.
Right.
And it's funny how philosophy seems so kind of bound up in story in that way.
Yeah, I mean, I was saying how on the first day of class, he said he could just give the definition. He could just say it. And it's, because it is, you know, it's just a sentence. It's not that crazy. But there's so much substance that's subsumed in the sentence that odds are I'm going to overlook all that. Just by hearing that. Like, within the definition that I provided, you don't even hear the word context. Like, and maybe I gotta look at the book again. Maybe I'm saying the definition wrong, but I'm pretty sure I'm not. The value is inherently related to context, kind of like how you talk about nature notion, like that back and forth, and that back and forth between value and context ultimately, like, if value is compatible with the context, then you have like a good moral. For example, like you can't have a moral without the relationship between a value and a context. So it's the significance of like something achieving its purpose to a significant degree. Significance has to do with the context. What is context? So there's a bunch of layers that you have to peel back like the onion to actually get the sentence, to get the definition itself.
Yeah, and it makes me think, and I'll give it to Michelle, like, you say, oh, context, that's like environment. Well, not all environments are a context, right? This that tractor over there is sitting in the environment of the field, but it's not really the context unless it was maybe plowing in a field, and then suddenly the field would turn into an environment in a context that gives meaning to the operation as bush hogging, right? So then action can change kind of an environment into a context. No, so, there's lots of environments that aren't necessarily context, and it's interesting to think that an environment might be turned into a context relative to an action. But then, of course, that immediately brings a what? Kind of an intention, and brings up, like, something that's trying to be accomplished and different things. And I think, what's interesting about that, and I'll give it to Michelle, is that Aristotle was adamant in value ethics, which sometimes I think it maybe when it was called value ethics, it led to some kind of confusions, but that would be another topic, because it is about value. I'm not saying it's not about value, but for Aristotle, ethics is a perpetual act of weaving. Like, you are correctly weaving together what's going on with its context, with its intention, and I like the word weaving. It makes me think Leibniz from Morley's book, and that means you have to be active. And for Aristotle, it's very dangerous to think that you can determine something is good by the outcome. Because if you say, oh, well, we finished plowing the field, therefore we did a good job. Well, what if you sacrificed your, family relationships to do it because you were out there avoiding a birthday party that you were supposed to do, right? You say, in a sense, there is one outcome you've realized, but relative to the whole of the life, you've failed to order values. So there's this constant kind of sense of weaving that sometimes I think utilitarianism can miss generally.
Yeah, I think too that there's kind of two things that come to mind. I think it's absolutely right, and that's a great idea to think about the fact that morals come from the connection between context and value. And I do wonder though about people who have a shared context, right? Like, let's just say if we think in familial situations, this is where you see the most challenge to it, right? Generally speaking, they may kind of agree upon have more or less the same concept of morality, but I'm thinking the micro morals, where it's almost just I value this and you value that, and now how do we make that compatible in a family context, and that's very challenging because and just to think about, so it's even more interesting because then you have to kind of go to something, I want to say kind of more fundamental or something like that.
Yeah, I mean,
what do you think?
I mean, it reminds me of the conversation last night in terms of just having the emotion, the actual emotions on the table.
Right.
And then the context becomes the ultimate context because you are just putting yourself out.
Everything,
everything.
The ground. Yeah.
And in that sense, the values, how the values relate to that type of context becomes very clear in those situations. And then that's when you could be confident, or at least for me, it's you could be confident in how to navigate yourself and express yourself when the context meets that, I think, hard place to get to, that emotional vulnerability that I do think is typically only within a family
setting,
setting, or a close friend, a friend setting, which that's tomato at that point. So
no, it's funny. I'll just note quickly, for Zupancha, he talks about how the reason they traditionally link, say, sex within marriage is because sex is the unveiling of the trauma. He says that it's not that sex caused the fall. is that the fall was like the punishment of the fall is sex, because then you get locked in relational contexts where you encounter that real. But then, you know, the joke there from like a Christian theology is, well, like, you know, you would say like, well, actually the joy that could be found through the encounter of the real is greater than the joy not encountering the real. So that's kind of like you go through purgatory to get to heaven, and New Jerusalem's better than Eden. But the point is that it's interesting to think that, like, there's almost a problem, then back to you, is that, like, a lot of families or individuals bring their own kind of context or ideas of things, and it's not the shared, but to get to the shared, there has to be a breaking of everyone's mini frameworks, which nobody likes, of course. So that provides a lot of difficulty.
Yeah, and I appreciate what you both said. It made me think about with how this gets even more interesting, or kind of you have to be more aware and have this process of like letting go but still establishing things when it comes to parenting or like with children. Because for example, okay, if we talk about the emotional vulnerability, children, if for them to express emotional vulnerability on some sort of value could potentially be them like, I don't want to go to bed, I want to keep watching this show or they're playing this game or whatever it is, right? So they're being very open with like and now yes, we're talking about different levels of maturity and of emotional intelligence, but like they're just being like, their value is to still keep playing the thing they want to play or doing the thing they want to do, and that's their value right then, you know. And they're being usually pretty they demonstrate their emotions can't very openly because like they're children, there's like no filter. They're just sharing like, but I'm upset and I'm, you know, want to do this, and so that for me I think what's interesting is like it's kind of like being able to acknowledge, I see a value there for you, and that's not wrong to have such a value, but it is in conflict with another value, which is going to bed, for example, right? Getting a shower and going to bed, or, you know, trying to get rest for the next day. And so I wonder if parenting is just constantly actually revealing that there is a nexus of values, right? Like there's a context of values itself. You know, it's not merely value plus context equals moral. It's like there's all these values, you know, and they're always contextual, and they're always in a nexus between each other. And then you get like on the other side of that some sort of you know, moral in the sense of like, well, this is about like kind of overall wellness, right? So but the thing is that, so in that case, I guess I want to say there could be a justification of saying, hey, this value of getting enough sleep will actually facilitate you feeling good in the morning, right? And being able to do more of the fun stuff you love to do, whether that's playing outside and riding your bike, and then, you know, when it's time to do screen time, enjoying that too. Like just establishing that, hey, this is an important thing that, yes, what your value is might seem to trump that right now, but as the parent, you're kind of teaching, hey, this other value at this time right now is actually more important than that one, but not completely just ignoring the fact that they have a value. And that's why I think a lot of times like acknowledging, like, I see you're upset because you want to still do this, however it is still bedtime. So you're having to kind of play the both, right, where you're saying I hear you, but I can't just always be budging on whatever. Like if your child just never wanted to eat their food, or they never want to, and you can't force them, but you also kind of have to provide the context where they will say, oh wow, like mommy's teaching me that's something important to do, because then it makes me healthy and it feels better. You know what I'm saying? So it's I do feel like that's where it gets into this interesting place of the nexus of values themselves within families, and the emotional kind of on the table. There's a lot of emotions with children, and that's great. But it's also just like, I think maybe there is that place to be able to connect in a more raw way, and like this powerful way. But it also can be like tricky, because in their emotive display, it's hard to be like, oh, I see you want this so much, and I'm saying no, and then you just sort of feel like, oh, I feel like the bad guy, you know? So anyways, what does that make you think about?
They have to also see your value. The bed time, like.
Sure. Or that I care, you know?
Right.
It's like I care enough to say, like, we're not going to just stay up till midnight, because...
Right. It's not like an arbitrary it's more than a suggestion, but like it's what you're proposing isn't arbitrary. Like it's 10 o'clock. Like
sure.
You've been up for, you know, a long time.
Yeah.
Like I want you to be healthy and have your rest. Like that's that's like entailed with that context.
Yeah.
That unfortunately, for them to really understand that, they would have to not obey, and then see the fact, oh my gosh, I'm exhausted the next day.
Yeah.
Like, this stinks.
Yeah.
Like, and kind of like what Daniel was talking about with the tractor.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I have no farm background. I mean, I just, you know, don't live under a rock, so I know what a tractor is. Like, let's say I did live under a rock, you know? Like, I would look at the tractor, and I wouldn't understand anything.
Like, what is that over there? What do you
Right.
mean that? Yeah.
That's some crazy modern art.
Right. Did you paint that? But
It's a hologram.
right, exactly. Like, so I think like there has to be a sense of knowing. There has to be a sense of knowing the purpose.
Yeah.
And I think that comes with how you express your value proposition.
Yeah, and I think the how is so important there.
Yeah.
How do you do it? Because the ironic thing is trying to establish something that actually is ultimately maybe better for them as a child, having certain boundaries on whatever it is, sleep, eating, or just whatever it is, getting some fresh air. These things, like, you're teaching them so that they ultimately can incorporate that themselves and, like, see how they would want to do that for themselves one
Right.
day. For themselves and
Right.
independently. But if you do it too heavy-handed, where you're kind of like, you're kind of, I don't know, if you become too bossy and kind of too in the mode of like it becoming sort of like a power dynamic, then they can just become like resentful. Now, when we were talking we talked about how, like, okay, a child might become resentful and you can't actually control that. All you can do is sort of lovingly and be aware of your how, so that you're actually trying to teach and not just force, right?
Yeah.
It's a teaching. So that they say, oh, okay, I see, I get that, and then they actually just do it. They want to do it themselves. So like, oh, this is what we do. This is our rhythm, or this is good for
Right.
me, and I see that. Mom loves me. That's why she's doing it. But the resentment is also going to happen. We're just like,
Right.
oh, you're just being mean, or you just don't want me to get what I want. You know?
Well, I do think. Sorry, I do think the resentment ultimately gets overcome. Like, for example, like with my situation, like I didn't have like a screen time, so to speak. But like,
Just open time to do whatever.
right.
Whenever,
But like
right?
with my dad, like when I would get into trouble all the time, and like when you get into trouble, like my dad would be there for me to like save the day or help me, or he would just be there for me. So at
You
the
get in
end,
trouble at school and stuff, like, or with other people.
in general, literally.
He's at the 7-Eleven knocking over shelves.
the Wawa, yeah.
Your dad comes out of
Yeah.
the bathroom. He's like,
Right.
hey.
Oh, man.
Did you pay for that hoagie?
Yeah,
But basically, it was like, let's say I never grew resentment over the fact that my dad wasn't, up my butt, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
But let's say I did, it would be shown that that is the case because he cares, and the care is still manifesting via him being there for me when I do, like, fail, essentially. So, in the event they do resent that, it's like it's only a matter of time before something not good happens where you need your parent, like if or just someone that loves you and cares for you to be there for you. And it's typically your parent that will be the first ones there. So like that's when it's like, okay, can I really resent this person? Like, so it's I feel like you're in a win-win situation.
Well, I think that's why it maybe goes back a little bit to intention, and you said the word purpose. We
Right.
talked about intention before. Daniel had mentioned the word purpose, where maybe it's the fact that, like, this is all rooted in love. It is rooted in care and attention, and trying to be aware and just give attention, good attention to your children. Like, where there's a sense in which hopefully that can kind of that goes a long way, even though sometimes it feels like, oh gosh, am I doing the right thing? Am I doing enough? And sometimes they will be bitter or resentful about it because I don't agree. They just don't want to do that. They don't like that. They don't. And it's like, I think I wonder if hope, the hope, and maybe it's wishful thinking, but the hope could be that if it's rooted in love and presence, that even if they are resentful, it won't. It eventually you're gonna have to let them work. You're gonna have to let them work through that because.
Right.
And because you can't make someone not resentful. I mean, the best you could do is just say, like, I see how you're feeling, and I acknowledge, I understand that, but I do love you, and I'm trying to do the best for you, but I'm not perfect either. We're just doing our best.
Right.
So I don't know. I hope, like, the wishful thinking part is that maybe the fact that it's done in love and care can help. Like you said, it's like even if they do feel resentful, you can't guarantee it, but the hope is that maybe they would work that way out of that resentment because they see, oh wow, that person actually just really was there for me.
Well, as just a comment, what I think the first thing it should be noted is that very often moral questions are asked in a scenario, like a trolley problem or pick your own adventure, whatever. But what you see there is moral reasoning if you grant me the phrase moral reasoning, requires a number of episodes. Like if you're saying, what should you do? It's like if you ask, what should you do in a given parenting situation? Well, it seems like a toss-up. But then if you have this kind of, well, it's going to unveil the care. Like you'll create the care will come out eventually. Well, then what ends up happening, like one of the things I'm critical for is like so many academics, in my opinion, have basically destroyed moral reasoning because they pick a situation where you say, well, I don't know what the answer is. And they say, well, then there's no moral reasoning. When really there's no such thing as moral reasoning on a point. It has to unfold according to a story. Right? But they don't make room for that kind of way of thinking. And you can basically deconstruct anything that you take from a situation into a point. You know, to use the Leibniz language. Like or to make from a story to an episode. And that, what a lot of, in my opinion, philosophers or even, dare I say, intellectuals in general don't realize they are doing when they think they disprove something is merely they are ontologically shifting it from a situation to a point, and basically everything as a point can be undermined because nothing operates as such.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's a good point.
In terms of like expressing the sentiment, it's like, you know, you guys do a lot of intellectual conversation. Like for me, I like definitely do that a lot, but like there's times where I could see myself being a parent and being like, I can't listen to my child right now. I have a headache, like I have beaten myself up like mentally, where it's like for me to like actually pay attention to my child, I just need 5 minutes to sit down, you know, or I just need a nap or something, you know, like. And I'm not a parent, but like I feel like expressing like dad needs a nap in order to love you, like in a I mean that's too crude,
right?
But saying that in like a way where it's showing that I need this for me in order to give you everything I can give you.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And, yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, I resonate with that a lot. I think. I mean, and it's kind of like. Right, like the way that it's kind of like for them to be able to see that there is this, I don't know, I think there's something interesting because, you know, and we can get into like Lacan and all of this and kind of the breaking of like, oh wow, I'm not my mom, and like she has her own needs, I have my own needs, and then there's siblings and they have their needs, and now it's just sort of like, you know, it's this clash of all these needs and wants, and you're navigating that, and obviously the parent is going to put survival and thriving of the children first because they cannot feed themselves in their littlest year, you know, they can't take care of themselves, so they have to kind of have the priority. But this this point that you're saying is really important, where it's kind of like saying like if you're having to address something discipline wise or whatever, you have to sometimes say like, I can't really talk to you right now, I need to go take a walk around the house, so because you have to kind of collect your own thoughts sometimes, or take some time to just recharge or whatever, so you can actually effectively lovingly parent, and you'll love them even if you're tired, you'll love them no matter what, but it's to be able to, for them to understand your love and that expression of love, you may actually also need to take care of your needs sometimes, and that's like another thing where it's like it's always in this kind of like dance you know, you can never sort of say that there's just it's like your autonomous rationality point, Daniel. Anytime you just got autonomous rationality, it's not going to work effectively. Because even though it seems very valid to say, well, the children's needs are always first, true, except for the fact that you're also a human being. Right. You're still a type of child in a sense, right? Like you still have your, whether we want to go in like the inner child or even just like child of God, or the fact that you're just a human being, you have your own needs. So it's like that is still something that you, if you may just, and vice versa, if you're the mom, you're like, well, I have needs and my needs are most important. Well, that's not right either. Like that's autonomous. You're making it just one-sided. And the children they would suffer for that in an unnecessary way. But ironically, putting anyone's needs as like the one and only, right? Well, that's actually going to make them suffer too, right? Because if you can't parent effectively because you didn't like collect yourself, right? Then you're thinking you're doing the best for them, but then you end up not doing the best for them, right? Which is such and I don't know why it's like this strange thing in your head where you have to get A/B. You have to realize that actually sometimes doing something for yourself is actually doing something for the other, which is so weird. You know?
Well, we don't want to do that because then you're responsible for the transition points.
Yeah.
We rather say it's always one or the other, because then there's nothing you can be responsible for, and you also can't mess up.
You just keep doing that.
Yeah.
It made me even think in the most extreme cases where you have like an actual baby, where
yeah.
in that case it's like the closest thing to that autonomous rationality,
Yes,
where it's like
right.
they
need you at every single second.
But
yeah.
even then, though, that's not necessarily the case. Like if you have like a not baby alarm, what is it called? Where it's
Monitor?
like,
Monitor.
Yeah, where it's like you're in your bedroom
Yep,
and they're in
they're
there.
A drone. You mean
And
like a
it's
drone?
It's like
It follows them.
right. Like if you've been up for like basically a whole day, and it's like, all right, I put them to sleep. They're finally asleep.
They're safe.
And I'm just gonna close my eyes for a second, and then I hear the crying, and it's like, it's not like, I mean, I don't know, but I'm using my imagination here. Like, it's not like I would spring up and like run straight there and like not even let myself like take a second. Like I could see myself being like giving like 30 seconds or a minute where it's just like I just need to sit for, like I hear the crying happening.
Yep.
I'm just gonna sit in it for like 2 seconds because I just need to in order to provide the need.
care. Yeah.
Like sometimes you have to like that's when it's hard to judge when it's like you've done that too much, where then you like you're too late. You can't actually provide the care because you've actually were too selfish.
It's the risk. Exactly. Because there's the thing. Someone may counter and say, well, why do you need a minute to rest? Is it actually the case that you need a minute to rest? Maybe you could have be tougher or something.
I think this is honestly where mom guilt comes in. Like, where,
Yes.
I don't know if you've heard that mom guilt. It's very kind of like mainstream terminology that people use in like the motherhood circles. But like this idea that there's always a feeling of like I didn't do enough, I wasn't there quick enough, I didn't, and whatever, which comes from actually a healthy place because it means you care about your child, your baby, or your children.
Yeah.
But you can also go in the extreme of like, and it could be the fact that also we have much more isolated networks today. Like a lot of people would just have much more extended family around. So then when you're feeling sleepy and you hear your baby in the baby monitor, you would call on your partner, you'd call on your aunt, what I mean, your sister, whoever it was, and they would actually help you out because they care just as much. It's not their baby, but they love it just as if it was their own.
And they love you, and so far as they want to make sure that you're in a good place to take care of your baby,
Yes.
so they don't have to do it all the time.
Right. There's a double mothering that goes on. Right. Like there's a mothering of the child, and then there's also the mothering that the mother needs, if that makes any sense.
Yeah,
and we forget that doubleness. And this happens with other transitions. We were talking about with the mother, but this could also happen from becoming a boy to a man. There's lots of transitions that I think, or just stepping into a full-time job position or moving somewhere. Like all of these things that put you in a very vulnerable place. Where you're just, I'm doing this for the first time. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm trying to do my best. Like, we need to be like that. There's this interesting kind of dynamic of, because we're talking about all this nexus of multiple values, that's what I think that was what I don't want to reduce it to the village, right? But that language of I think that's why you also needed a nexus of people. Now, what gets harder is because you're like, well, who are those people? Do I trust those people? People are not as close to their families physically anymore, depending. Right. And so it gets more challenging. And I think people are very much like, this causes a lot of anxiety for people. I do think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think all that's really, really good. Well, if there are the opening of the conflict of mind, truth organizes value. So whatever is true organizes the values at play. So for example, if you believe that if someone indeed cheated on a test and you ask them to be honest and they told you that they didn't cheat on the test, they would be lying, right? But let's say you think that they cheated on the test and you tell them to be honest and they say I didn't, but you believe the situation is one where they did, well, then you would say they were lying, right? Mm-hmm. So gauging the value that's being exercised, like the value, honesty, goodness, et cetera, so forth, kindness, patience, is relative to how the situation is being understood, like the truth of the situation that you're understanding. Well, what ends up happening is like a given mom or a given parent, only they know when they are saying, I need 5 minutes because they literally need 5 minutes, and when they are saying it simply because they're being lazy, for example, right? But of course that means the choice is the context and it's abyssal. Like only you can know the choice. It's okay. You have to create your own context.
And it's constantly like that. Like where you're like, oh my gosh, I have to be the one who makes this determination. Am I making the right determination?
Yes, and you are the only judge. Yeah. So you're looking for someone outside of you to say, no, the 5 minutes you took there was justified because you're tired. But someone else comes in and said the 5 minutes you took there was unnecessary because you shouldn't be tired, right? So there's this kind of abyssal, like the trick is suddenly as a parent or if you're just doing your own thing in general, where only you can know what it is, you have to make a choice and discernment, and then kind of stand by it and kind of trust it. And then you have to wonder if you're brainwashed or if you're just rationalizing to yourself. And there's some sort of, for me, the problem with moral reasoning that's point-based as opposed to situation-based, if you grant me that language, this moral weaving, is you don't get the existential dimension. Like the existential dimension, which then shows that there's a certain character that has to be developed to stand by the discernment of the context. Because even when you're saying a significant degree, of course, what defines significance? Well, you say X instead of Y, 5 instead of 4. Now, of course, that has to be relative to the truth of the thing. So there is, but then that right there is like you're discerning the concrete, the abstract, all together, and then you're making a judgment, a weaving. But that weaving is, in a sense, abyssal. Only you can be the standard against which that weaving is judged against. And then what if you're crazy?
Right. It's tough.
Well, to me, it gets into conspiracies because, why not?
Perfect. Yeah, why not?
Like a conspiracy is a moral thing for people. Like they're stopping the corruption of the government, or they're stopping the government. Like a conspiracy is a moral structure.
Right.
The problem is it's self-relating. But of course, all moral structures are self-relating. So just the fact that it's self-relating doesn't mean it's bad.
Right.
The problem is it doesn't correspond. But how do you determine if it corresponds? Like how do you tell? This is what's weird. How do you tell if you really need the 5 minutes versus had I maybe eaten better, I wouldn't need the 5 minutes? Just to make an example, right? Like how do you tell? Well, you have to trust your own discernment and information and all this other existential stuff.
Well, go ahead, Andrew.
I was just gonna say quickly. Basically, the only way to know is after a failure or after a problem.
Yep.
That's the
Very good.
tragic part.
I agree.
Can you give an example, if you don't mind?
I choose to. I hear my baby crying, and it's like, I'm going, and you go, and what happens is you're holding your baby, and you completely pass out.
Yeah.
Like you completely pass out from sleep deprivation.
That's right.
And then it's like you're just laying there passed out.
Yeah. Which proves you really needed the 5 minutes because there's an objective reality now.
It's like a safety issue, 'cause it's like the baby is the baby safe, right?
Right.
That's right. Properly held, or they get,
Or if maybe they're old enough, maybe it's traumatizing.
Yeah.
Like maybe they remember it, or maybe they don't remember it, and
Right.
like subconsciously they remember it, so they have like a phobia, if you will, of like just sleeping or something. I'm being crazy. But
No, I mean, I'll just note, and then to you, is that, like, Hegel's basically, without failure, there's no sublation. Like, failure is a necessary part of development. And we make a huge mistake when if we take the Bible, for example, the Torah, like, we say, oh, it's a list of moral commands. The stories of everyone failing those moral commands is part of the moral teaching. Like, we separate the moral points from the moral stories, if you will, and then we're fools. Because then we don't understand that ethics is something more. It's something more like situations and experimentation, if you will, and then figuring out how to get better at it.
Right.
And somebody could hear that and be like, well, but they wouldn't be failing if there was no moral, list.
Well, that's
right?
the temptation.
But here's the thing, in all that we're talking about, on this extremely micro level, you will be constantly kind of having to make value judgments. And that's where I think it's important to think about morality on the micro level, the micro morality.
Yeah, the world gives you morality.
It's easy to just think like, oh, okay, well, like that moral system is why they failed. So if they didn't have that moral system, they wouldn't fail. No, they would have still failed. They would have still failed, and they may have not had
There's
less
a
of
concrete
sense of
world.
what to even refer back
Yeah.
to get to kind of realign their lives or whatever it is. And we can talk about this if we don't want to think about it in terms of a list of morals. So I think there's a place to consider that. But like just the idea of wisdom itself, right? Or the virtues of beauty, truth, goodness. Like there's something about that that's supposed to be about like not just surviving but also thriving in your life, right? And you're gonna have to sort of like always be gauging like how much is what I'm doing or what I'm choosing in line with that. Now, you don't want to get paranoid, but maybe it has something to do with like really being able to like discern what you hear inside of yourself. But at the same time, like what inside of myself can sometimes be very selfish. So it's like, I think maybe it's just about like, I do want to say there was a book that I read that was really good by Nouwen. Yeah, he's Henri Nouwen. And it's just a little book. But he was talking about this idea of like, we need to be able to have almost like this, we talk about like nature and notion going back and forth. It's a lot of times like that. And he was talking about that with solitude and community, where you need to take the time for yourself and your solitude, right, to kind of do your practice, whether that's like, meditation, prayer, time, basically time with yourself and also with the silence, which is like this greater thing beside you. And that can also be a creative time as well. And that then feeds back into community where you're like, wow, I got like, I use that time to in devotion, in crafting, in whatever, so that when I am with my community, I actually have something to offer. And I'm not just a leech on like the community. I'm actually like just more present and all of that. So it's going back and forth, you know? So I guess what I mean to say is like to be able to discern if you're accurate in your discernment. That's kind of the question of like honing that.
Right.
And maybe how to hone that. Yeah.
Right. I mean, just makes me think like with storytelling, you could always edit. Like the editing can go on forever.
Right.
It really could, because
Right.
your notion of theme with regard to the story as time passes, as you're editing, will change.
Right.
And like it's not that what was in the story was wrong. It's that it could be more thematic, and not that like the level of thematic the content is. Like if it is thematic content, it's thematic content. But you could always make more. Like and that's where it's like tricky, because you could be very hard on yourself, knowing that you could always be better. But that doesn't. But just because you could always be better doesn't mean you're not already good.
Yep, exactly.
And I think having that mentality of realizing that it could always be better is only the mentality of someone that is good. Like that is the curse of the good person, which is I'm not good.
That's interesting. Yeah.
And I have to become good.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, that right there, like when you say, oh, I could be better, that almost has an inherent failure in it that is necessary for the identification of the truth, if you will.
Right.
And so it's very interesting, like again, if we think religiously, so many religious traditions have this emphasis on seeing yourself as a sinner or fallen or something, because there's really kind of an insight there that moral reasoning is not possible but from a place of fallenness.
Right.
It makes me think as well, like when this interesting issue where you're saying, Michelle, with the children, where it's kind of like, oh, they're being transparent about their emotionalism, but it's not really the same. It seems like there's a difference between transparency that's searching for where the frameworks hit against one another, where the truths hit against one another, and transparency that is simply transparent about a feeling that's not searching for a ground. That seems to be very different. And maybe it's like an ontological transparency versus an emotional expression being called a transparency. Like where you say, okay, I as a kid, I value staying up and playing video games.
So is this the emotional or...
Oh, don't pull in Mr. Luber's hand. Okay, give him a hug. Give him a
Hey,
hug.
look at Mel,
You
wanna
want to
sit
sit for a minute? Very.
Go, buddy.
So the emotional versus the ontological.
Yeah, yeah.
When you're giving the example, I didn't know which was which.
Sure. So for example, if the kids are like, hey, I want to stay up all night to do the video games, they're kind of emoting. And the tricky here, it's almost like there's always a difference based on the order. Like if you keep, like you need emotion for ontology, but then emotion without ontology is like emoting or something. Like everything kind of shifts if it's not all together in situation. So that's always kind of like difficult, because it's hard to talk about these things without making something sound bad. Like it makes it sound like emotions are bad, but really we're saying like even the hunger for truth is bad if it's not ordered with the, say, good or the relational, right? So anyway, when the kid is like, I'd like to stay up all night and play the video game, they're kind of ignoring the reality that they have a body, right?
Yeah.
They're ignoring the reality. So when the kid is saying, I want to stay up all night and play video games, they're kind of just emoting what they feel. They're being transparent about what they're feeling, but they're not using that transparency to say, that's how I feel, but I feel that way because I have a body, and that body has to sleep. And if I don't sleep, I can't play video games. So, I can't ignore that background behind the emotion. You're not using the transparency. Maybe the language is you're not using the transparency to go deeper. And it's like, well, there's a transparency that's kind of searching for the valid framework, the valid ground, if you will, that makes care possible. And if that is ignored, then you can't play video games. So maybe like there's an issue here where it's transparency, where you have a lot of people like transparency that's kind of an emoting, but then there's a transparency to find what is causing the failure. like which you didn't even know you needed to engage in until there was a failure.
Right.
So I guess I called it ontological, like an ontological emoting. That may not be the best language for it, but some kind of look.
Failure. Yeah, no, I get that.
Yeah, in the same way that like you have to have Hamlet to see where the value system of Athens comes in conflict with Jerusalem, Achilles and Jesus, and that's the story. Like that conflict between those two is what you're framing. So Hamlet is being transparent about what he feels or what he's thinking to arrive at the issue, which is the break between Athens and Jerusalem, and that's where then a decision has to be made. Right. So likewise, you're locating a failure to figure out where the choice is going to be.
I think it brings up like a big question that can often be discussed in like, you know, the parenting approaches world, which I appreciate paying attention to just to learn more. But basically, like this idea of emotions from children, let's just talk about it like that. Like, yes, explosive reactions and stuff like that are of emotion. I guess it sounds like what you're saying, Daniel, is like there is a risk in that, as in like, you know, we're not just, and it kind of relates to what we talked about last night, right? Where it's like radical transparency. Like, are you just going to be like just saying anything and everything that you feel out loud? Well, as a child, you don't know how to regulate that yet. Right. So you do. You just say, I'm really mad, I'm mad. You know, and you yell and you get upset about.
Even adults.
Even adults.
Even adults do, exactly. Yeah, kids are, like, in some ways, kids are very honest, and there's something to learn from that, actually. And learning how to sort of regulate it seems to be like, well, how do you do that then? There's one approach where it's just like, well, something that I've heard is just to say that when you start to stigmatize emotions, the risk is that you don't ever learn emotional intelligence. You just learn it's bad to feel angry, or it's bad to feel this, or it's bad to do that. So I think there can be this bothness that might be a better approach to say, hey, it's not wrong to feel angry, because we actually all will feel angry, right? Because it means you care about something. It might not be the thing that would be best to care about right now, but it's because you care about something, right? But it's about, again, it goes back to the how. How do we handle that anger? What do we do with that anger? And that's where it comes to like giving different coping mechanisms or different ways to handle it, so that it's not just. But if you just call it bad, or like you shouldn't be angry. Well, first of all, you're angry now because they're angry, so it's kind of hypocritical. Sure. And then second of all, it may not actually teach them how to self-regulate their own emotions to the place where they can be open about their emotion, but not have it become this kind of explosive, reactive situation between them and their future whoever, right, friend or you know, husband or whatever. You know, so it's kind of like, I think the approach could kind of be to sort of like, it almost makes me think of just drawing awareness to it or something like that. Like to give the language for, hey, you are feeling angry and I see it's because of this reason, right? But it wouldn't be appropriate then to like, you know, hit somebody, because at that point you're harming them, and you are harming yourself in a way, because you're potentially risking that relationship, even though right now you're mad at them and you don't even want to be siblings, but like they are going to still be your sibling, you know?
Let me ask you guys a question.
Yeah.
In the event where it's like no matter what, you're expressing a sentiment, even if you're like not saying anything, or being very standoffish, like that in itself is an expression, but it's not like active in a sense. In the situation where it's like you care about the relationship, but there isn't like that active expressing of the sentiment, then it seems like the only thing you can do is not the only thing you can do, but it seems like a reasonable thing to do is to walk away, because it's like, how can you even? There's no philosophy in that. Like there's no discourse, or it's a toxic discourse, because you have to like figure out like how to make the sentiment become actively expressed.
Yeah.
So I feel like in today's age, like at least like I feel like it's more of an passive expression of of the sentiment when there's a problem. It's way more passive.
Are you saying this is good or bad, or just is how it is?
I think, from my estimation, it seems to be like how it kind of is a little bit, but it's just not a fruitful way to be in my mind. Your thoughts on that? Just
you're asking a really interesting question.
Like how to how to respond to somebody where there's not an active sentiment being expressed, but you care, so you want the story to continue to unfold.
So
the approach is kind of just walk away, or kind of just not really handle it.
Right, like, but that doesn't seem like that seems right to me in a way.
Right, 'cause you're kind of you're just letting it unfold as it is, right?
Right, but at the same time, it's like there's something about that that's like not right. Like,
no, but you've put your finger on the main problem, and in the sense of how do you morally, we'll put it in this way, how do you morally reason with individuals that do not have the capacity to morally reason? Right? I mean, at the end of the day, and that's not an arrogant thing. Like, I can't fix a car. How would someone, there's no situation, though, where the mechanic would be like, oh, man, I need Daniel to fix the car. How do I get him to learn to fix the car, to fix it? I pay him to do it, right? But relations are different because you're not, they are consistent equally of both people, in a way. Not in the,
we're all mechanics in that sense.
Yeah, so we're all mechanics, but
each other.
That's correct.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, in a way, relations don't automatically teach their skills. Like, we all know mechanics don't automatically teach their skills, so you have to go learn them. But there's something about the relation that seems to convince people that you know how to relate just by being human. And that's not the case. Whereas you really can't deceive yourself into believing genuinely that you can fix a car if you've never tried, right? You know you have to learn the skill, but there's something about the experience of relation that results in people thinking they know how to do it when they do not, and then even suggesting there are skills involved sounds weird. It sounds instrumental or something, but there is. And it's like the arts, right? Everyone's like, well, I can paint I can paint a picture. Like, any kid can do that. It's like, yes, no. It's not all the same. So it's like that. And so there's a problem here where if you're in a situation where the individual you are with could not think situationally to get to the ground of the care, or the causer, I suppose, the causer.
Right.
So let's frame it this way. What is the correct way to relate to an individual who cannot get to the causer? Would that be a fair way to put it?
Absolutely.
Okay, so that to me, there's also a this question comes out in business big time. Because in business, you are forced to work with people. You have no choice, or you have to change job, or you're forced to work with the client.
Right.
And they cannot reason to the causer. So how do you relate to them? Well, to me, this is the skill of the convincing, or the skill of the presenting, or being able to help someone morally reason who doesn't even know that's what they're doing. So you have to then figure out how to present moral reasoning in a manner where they don't feel like you're being philosophical, but you're helping them see through. And maybe that's what, arguably that's what the therapist or the psychoanalysis is actually doing for people. And then what you find in business very often is you've got to, this is a funny thing, in business you find yourself actually very often having a psychoanalytical role, like a kind of therapist role, or your organization's dead. It won't last. People don't realize that. I think it is definitely over 90% of businesses fail. It could be even a higher number.
I think you bring up the notion of the causer just as it relates to that passive sentiment expression. It's that they don't actually want to know the causer. They don't actually want to get a sense of the causer because the real. It is destructive while simultaneously beautiful in the sense that
it's stressful, it's destructive, and now you're responsible for it.
Right.
Before, now so now do you want to be responsible? That's terrifying. So this is why the real, basically there is no possibility, we talk about belonging, there's no possibility of a dress without the real, and the real sucks. And then the real is going into a wilderness where if people didn't bring supply, it's basically when it's people don't have moral reasoning to get to the call. It's you look over at John and you're like, John, you didn't bring any food, tent, shelter. We're going into the real, buddy. This is it's only a matter of time. This is, not only is this a relation, this is a business relation. This is where people have money and people are stressed and different things, and you didn't bring any supplies? No, I know, I'll be fine. I've slept before. I don't need a tent. I've eaten every other night. Why would I need to bring food? It's because this is different. And then for me, basically I agree where if you're dealing with someone who's not genuinely caring about the causer, it's not a bad move to walk away. In fact, that can be the most mature thing to do. But what about in situations where you can't walk away? Or that would require you to maybe move to a different community or quit the job. It's almost the question of how to bestow moral reasoning. And then there's a danger of bestowcentrism from Nietzsche, which is when you bestow, they don't internalize it, therefore they don't actually make it their own. But how do you bring someone aboard? And, this is arguably storytelling in some respects, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say really quick. I mean, I guess the best way is like to, if you practice what you preach, right? So like if you live it out, then hopefully like there could be a way in which, well, okay, I might not be able to even be able to tell them or get there to enact any change here, but I could just still do it myself. I don't know, like, and just sort of like let them maybe figure it out. I mean,
actually, so alas, everyone, we have to get ready for the net. But maybe this is what we'll bring to the net. Like, what do people think is the correct? Say, we were talking outside about what is the correct way to approach someone who doesn't want to morally reason or find the cause of a moral situation, because this is actually a massive issue.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask, like,
The issue.
Yeah, it's.
yeah, well, the
We're gonna throw it at the net. We're gonna be like, here, everyone, ChatGPT, go, NetGPT.
What do you think in terms of like, instead of the passive, like to counter the passivity, it seems to be able to be like show up really as like possibly a teacher, I guess, right? Like the opposite. What to you is the opposite of passivity? What are the risks of of engaging even when you're like, because I just like, okay, the passive route might be actually the only route at sometimes, right? But that as the default can sort of become just generally passive, right? And then you're just really not even, it's almost like not trying because it's hard. I don't know, like.
Yeah, I mean, I personally struggle with the passive. Like, I'm probably not the best person to ask about like when that's a good thing, because I will hold on to something even though I'm not the care isn't mutual, in that they're not wanting to understand the causer with me, because I think it's a collective understand. Like, to understand the causer, like when you watch a movie, it's like I have my own notion of the causer, but like my notion only becomes solidified after talking about the movie with other people, and they tell me their notion of the causer.
Right.
And then that's when it meets like reality for me. So.
No, that's excellent, and alas, but this is like, I think I agree with you that this is like the issue, and arguably, it's a nice framing, because it is the issue for why basically when Game B and all the people are talking about these new online like deep pluralism or whatever, this is the ticking time bomb. It's only a matter of time before you get a moral situation, where then someone doesn't want to know the causer or is convinced they know the cause, so they're not going to go through the philosophical reasoning, and that's it. Game over. Yeah, because it's going to splinter. It seems like it splinters most of the time, unless you figure out a way to deal with this problem. Because, like, I'll say, even Jim Rutt will make the point to say that alternative communities that are religious seem to survive. And it's probably because maybe it's a part of where it's like, well, there is a causer named God, and we ultimately have to refer to him, and so even if we don't want to morally reason, we have to. So there's some sort of like push. There's some, so that would be curious. So maybe that's curious. But alas, Mr. Luber, I'm so glad you are here on the farm.
I wish people actually understood like how beautiful it is here. Like, it's really great.
Well, you're kind, Mr. Luber, and to pull you into the net to continue this. So this is quite curious. So for more by O.G. Rose, please visit ogrose.com. Mr. Luber and Alex have a very important book coming out on story and theme that I've had the pleasure of working with them on as an editor and reading through. It's remarkable, and there's a video on the meaning code. YouTube, it's a meaning code, right? That was a really good conversation you did. I suggest everyone to listen to that and to look forward for what is to come. So, Mr. Luber, good to have you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.